Everyone, welcome to Daily Revelations. Thanks for joining me and joining me on this journey. So today I was in Deuteronomy again, and nearing the end of Deuteronomy. And it's interesting. I've read Deuteronomy many times, but I've never noticed this specifically about this chapter. And so we get to the point where we're getting to the end of what Moses is telling everybody about what they need to do to follow God's commands. Remember, because they're about to go into the promised land and he is about to pass away. And he wants them to remember to follow God's law. So when they do move into the promised land, they're told to do this thing that these tribes, and they're named off, you go on to this mountain, Mount Gerizim. And these tribes, you go on to Mount Ebal. And the ones on Mount Gerizim are to yell blessings across. And the ones on Mount Ebal are to yell curses. Now it's interesting. I never quite got the fact that the place where the curses are being yelled from is also where God tells them to whitewash stones, large stones with limestone, and to place God's commands on them. Also, they are to create an altar and a place of worship to God on that mountain. Now, why? And that's what really struck me, was that, first of all, what are the types of worship that God enacted them to have there? And there was some basic things. First of all, burnt offerings. Now, burnt offerings, their general purpose was praise and petitions before God. So it was to pray just like we do. God, thank you. Great is God, and praising him, and then asking for his help in what we need help with. The second thing was to give peace offerings. Peace offerings was their type of fellowship, and then was to eat with God and to rejoice before him. These were all not things of condemnation, nothing connected to sin. It was all about crying out to God, fellowship with God, fellowship with one another, and enjoying community. It was church as we know it as believers. And these were the people then on this mountain. This mountain was the place where curses were to be released, cast towards the other side where God was, where he was going to be shouting blessings onto them. What a beautiful picture that is, that the place that God calls us to come worship him is not a place where those curses dwell. It is where they are to be shouted out from, where we are to give to God all the things of our lives that are yucky and we struggle with. And in his response, I want to bless you, and I want to bless you abundantly. And it made me think about, what do we do in our places of worship and where we fellowship with one another? Do we have that same sort of community of grace where we can be real and say, this is what I'm dealing with? These are the ugly places in my life that I don't want to be struggling with, but I am. And that we can release them, that we can shout them out, we can give them over to God. And as a community, we can fellowship with one another, accept one another, and allow God's blessings to bless one another with our words and with just our relationships. So just something to think about. This was the beginning of communal worship. And this is how God enacted it to be. This is the way he wanted it to be. That when we go into a community of believers, we should not feel condemned. We are all sinners. I just released my first book yesterday, and it's a lot about where I failed and where God's grace came in to heal my life. And we need to have the freedom to be open about that and to share with one another about those things in our lives, because none of us are perfect. And we aren't going to go anywhere if we don't have a place where we can safely release those things and receive the grace of God, not just from God himself, but from his people. That's where we show true love in a world that is condemning and wants us to hide and not be blessed, because we can just get beaten down by those things in life. And so we need to create an atmosphere of grace. And it starts with each of us. And it starts by saying, I'm going to release and get rid of the ugliness in my life by being real and allowing God's grace to come into my life. And I want to bless it onto others. And that's the atmosphere that I'm going to create around my life and within the community that I live in. And you know what? Once you do that, other people will do it too. They realize the healing power of being real and accepting others for who we are and who God is, that blesses us, not our own selves. We release the curse, and we allow the cross to come in to our lives and say that's what covers us, and God blesses us in return. So thanks for joining me for Daily Revelations today. It's always interesting what God has to teach us, and I'm glad to share it with you, what he's teaching me. I sure hope that you're diving into his word too and learning so much more. So I'll see you again tomorrow, everybody. Thanks for joining me.